This podcast is brought to you by Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate, powered by Kangaroo Fern Media Lab. Kangaroo Fern is Australia's independent video and podcast management agency with a mission to help individuals and entrepreneurs to start their own podcasts and harness the power of podcasting. A Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate production. GMG, your guide to Australian dream. Learn how to make your Australian dreams come true with GMG Visa Solutions, your guide to Australian dream. This fortnightly podcast provides general advice about migration law and practice, whether it be for studying, working, visiting, migrating to Australia, petitioning for your visa refusal or cancellation, or obtaining Australian citizenship. GMG Visa Solutions got you covered. GMG, your guide to Australian dream.
Good day everyone! Welcome to another episode of GMG Visa Solutions, your guide to Australian dream. This is your host, Jeroslyn Ligo Kovarskis, and this is brought to you by Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate and Ospod Syndicate, two independent podcast networks for people worldwide. To learn more, please visit www.guerrillapodcast.com.ph and www.australiapodcastsyndicate.com. For today's episode, we will introduce to you Subclass 408. This subclass is also known as a temporary activity visa. This visa allows people to come to Australia to do specific types of work on a short-term temporary basis. There are several types of work or category you can choose from when applying for this visa. In this podcast, we will just focus on one of the most timely and most relevant one considering our current situation with COVID-19 pandemic. So, for those who like, follow, and share our Facebook page GMG Visa Solutions and also our podcast, thank you very much and may you continue to support us. Also, for those who have sent their inquiries, rest assured that we will reply to you and provide you with general advice. If you want any comprehensive and specific advice tailored to your circumstances, please do not hesitate to contact us. Australian migration laws are constantly changing. The general advice we provide on this podcast is current on the time that we made the recording. Because of how often migration law changes, the general information provided today may not be applicable tomorrow. That is why GMG Visa Solutions is here for you. Also, just a reminder, whatever we talked about on this podcast are only general information, not in any way specific due to everyone having different circumstances. So let's begin. As I mentioned earlier, Temporary Activity Visa or Subclass 408 is for individuals who want to come to Australia to do specific types of work on a short-term basis.
Your podcast journey starts here. Take the first step on your side. Hustle with us. It starts with a great domain. Get your podcast web host with Beard and Coffee at www.beardandcoffee.com.au or find us at Facebook.
There are several activities or work types you can undertake with this visa, such as a special program, religious work, research activities, sporting activities, entertainment activities, super yacht crew, exchange arrangements, domestic work for executives, and invited participant, which means under this category, you're invited for other social and cultural activity. The most recent addition to these activities is the Australian government endorsed event. This is in response to the recent spread of COVID-19 global pandemic. The main purpose of this visa under Australian government endorsed event or AGEE is to let people stay in Australia to work if you are employed in a critical industry sector. Later on our podcast, I will let you know what jobs or employments are considered under the critical industry sector. So the basic eligibility criteria for this visa are as follows. You must apply online. You must be in Australia. You must have current visa that expires within 28 days or less. or your last substantive temporary visa expired less than 28 days ago. You must either have evidence from your employer that you have ongoing work in a critical sector and that no Australian citizen or Australian permanent resident is ready to fill the position, or justify that you cannot meet the requirement of any other visa at the stage when you did apply for this visa. This visa is temporary and its validity is up to 12 months. The visa application charge is 310 Australian dollars, but it could be free depending on your circumstances. The processing time for this visa application is not available at this stage. With this visa, under the Australian government endorsed event, you can 1. Remain in Australia to continue to work in a critical sector, including agriculture, food processing, healthcare, aged care, disability care, or child care during the COVID-19 pandemic. Medical professionals can commence work in the healthcare sector with this visa. Number 2, this visa will allow you to remain in Australia if you have no other visa options and are unable to depart Australia due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. And lastly, with this visa, you can include a family member with you. I would like to give emphasis on what jobs are considered under the critical sector. So, if you are working with agriculture, food processing, healthcare, aged care, disability care, or child care, then you are considered working under critical sector.
So you want to start a podcast, or perhaps you've already started one, but you're still unclear on how you can actually make this podcasting work. No worries. That's why we're here for you. We are Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate, powered by Kangaroo Fern Media Lab. Join our network. Contact us at info@kangaroofern.com because we're stronger together.
Visa application for Subclass 408 under the Australian government endorsed event can only be granted if you are in Australia. You can travel outside Australia and return as many times as you want while the visa is valid and there's no travel restrictions in place. If granted this visa, the Department of Home Affairs will digitally link your visa to your passport. You do not need a label or a sticker in your passport to enter Australia. So, let's now have a more in-depth discussion about the eligibility requirements. One of the eligibility criteria for temporary activity visa under the Australian government endorsed event Subclass 408 is that you must be onshore, meaning you can only apply for this visa if you are in Australia. Another requirement is that you must have 28 days or less remaining on your current visa, or your last substantive temporary visa expired less than 28 days ago. What is a substantive visa, you may ask? According to the Australian Migration Act 1958, substantive visa is any visa other than bridging visa, criminal justice visa, or an enforcement visa. Okay, so the next eligibility requirement is that if you are applying for this visa under the Australian government endorsed event, you must have evidence that you have ongoing work in a critical sector and that an Australian citizen or an Australian permanent resident cannot fill the position at this stage. What you can provide as evidence are payslips, employment contract, and a letter from your employer. Your evidence must confirm the dates of your employment and which critical sector you are working in. It must also state, or you must provide evidence that there is no Australian citizen or Australian permanent resident readily available to fill the position. Next requirement is that you must have enough money to support yourself or any dependent family members who are in Australia with you. Another requirement is that you must have adequate health insurance for the duration of your stay in Australia. This also applies if you have any family members who are in Australia with you. Since this visa is only temporary, You must satisfy the Department of Home Affairs that you have a genuine intention to only temporarily stay in Australia. To assess this genuine temporary entrant requirement, the Department of Home Affairs will consider your current situation, your immigration history, your compliance with the visa conditions, and any other relevant matters. Other eligibility requirements are: you must meet the character requirement, you must meet the health requirement, you must sign the Australian value statement that confirms that you will respect the Australian way of life and obey Australian laws. Also, you must not owe any money to the Australian government. If in any case you have outstanding debts, then it must be paid off prior to visa application. If you are onshore, you must not have had any visa cancellation or a previous visa application refusal. Let's now go to the visa conditions for a temporary activity visa, Subclass 408. Visa conditions are like limitations or restrictions or rules applicable to a person who is a lawful non-citizen of Australia. If these visa conditions are attached to the visa grant notice, then the person must abide with it, otherwise the visa may be cancelled. You must obey with the Australian laws. So what are some of the potential conditions that may be attached to Subclass 408 visa? At the moment, there are 12 potential conditions. First is condition 8106, which is a work limitation stating that you cannot work in Australia unless it is relevant to the business or task specified in your visa application. Condition 8107 is also a work limitation where it requires you not to stop working for your employer, not work in a different position, occupation, or another employer.
We are Independent Podcast Network. We are Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate. Would you like to hear your brand while supporting quality podcasts? Contact us now at advertise@guerrillapodcastsyndicate.com.
Not to stop doing the activity the visa was granted for, or do any activities for yourself or someone else. And finally, this condition requires you to hold a license, registration, or membership if it's mandatory to perform the occupation for which you are nominated. Condition 8114 is a limitation for super yacht crew, which requires the person to only work in Australia as a member of the crew for super yacht. Condition 8301 requires you to meet any outstanding public interest criteria after you have entered Australia and before your visa ceases. Condition 8303 requires you to not be disruptive. Condition 8501 requires you to maintain an adequate health insurance. Condition 8502 requires you to not arrive in Australia before the person specified in the visa entered Australia. Condition 8503 is a no further stay condition, meaning you must leave Australia before your visa expires. Condition 8516 states that you must continue to satisfy the criteria for the grant of the visa. Condition 8522 requires you to leave Australia with or before the primary visa holder. Condition 8525 states that you must leave Australia on the date or within the period specified in your visa grant letter or by the transport specified in your grant letter. Condition 8526 requires you to notify the Department of Home Affairs your place of residence in Australia 7 days before your visa ceases. Condition 8547 requires you not to work for the same employer for more than 6 months. And lastly, Condition 8548 allows you to only study for a maximum of 4 months while you are in Australia. Again, these conditions are just potential conditions that may apply to you if you are granted Subclass 408. So that's it. These are the basic information you need to know for Subclass 408 Temporary Activity Visa under the Australian Government Endorsed Event. As mentioned earlier, there are several other categories you can use for Subclass 408. Depending on your purpose for applying for Subclass 408 are the requirements that must be satisfied for the grant of this visa. If you have any questions or if there's any other visa that you want us to discuss on our podcast, please do not hesitate to contact us. We cannot stress enough that whatever we talked about on this podcast are only general information, not in any way specific. The reason being is because everyone has different circumstances. It is best to contact us so we can guide and provide you with visa options suitable to your preference and also your needs. We listen to you and deliver professional and flexible migration assistance catered for you. You can hear this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and many other podcast platforms. Also, you can listen to us through other media platforms, so please do not forget to like, follow, and share our Facebook page, GMG Visa Solutions, and also our podcast. You can contact us directly through our Facebook page, email us at enquire@gmgvisasolutions.com.au, or visit our website www.gmgvisasolutions.com.au for more information. We pride ourselves with well-trained consultants who are equipped and qualified to provide migration services wherever you are in the world. With our comprehensive knowledge and expertise on various migration issues, we can simplify it for you. No more complicated processes, just a straightforward approach that saves you time, money, and effort. So until next time, keep dreaming, keep praying. Dreams do come true. Thank you for listening to GMG Visa Solutions, your guide to Australian dream. See you, and may God bless us all, especially during these unprecedented times caused by COVID-19 pandemic. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to visit our website at www.GUERRILLAPodcastSyndicate.com, where you can subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, rate and review this podcast and share it with your friends. You can also join the conversation with Guerrilla We R on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please consider on making a donation to help us keep making the podcast you love. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.